In 1953, the US Central Intelligence Agency, also known as the CIA, embarked on a quest to use mind control as the ultimate weapon against their enemies during the Cold War. The mastermind behind the plan? A chemist named Sidney Gottlieb, who was convinced that he could crack the code to turn people's minds into mush for his own gains. So began Project MKUltra, America's best kept secret. From using unsuspecting captives in American prisons and detention centers to subjecting them to torture techniques like electroshock therapy and mind-bending doses of LSD, these are some of the unspeakable things that happen in Project MKUltra. No, I'm not talking about the aftermath of when you forget to pay your heating bills. The Cold War was a time of extreme political tension between the USA and the Soviet Union that went on from the 1940s to the early 1990s. But you know why they called it the Cold War? Even with all that crazy tension, the two big superpowers never actually threw down in a full-blown battle. With nuclear weapons on both sides promising complete annihilation, can you blame them? It was more like a game of who blinks first, without actually getting into a full-blown war. This concept was called mutually assured destruction, as the two giants wrestled for influence and dominance on the global stage. The origins of the Cold War can be traced back to the end of World War II. While the US and the USSR were allies during the war against Nazi Germany, their underlying ideologies, capitalism and democracy for the US, and communism and totalitarianism for the USSR, were extremely different. And once the common threat of Nazi Germany was eliminated, these differences started turning into tension. In the aftermath of World War II, Europe became the first battleground of this new conflict. The continent was metaphorically divided by what Winston Churchill termed the Iron Curtain, with Eastern Europe under Soviet influence and Western Europe siding with the US. This division crystallized with the construction of the Berlin Wall in 1961, the symbol of a divided world. But it wasn't just about military skirmishes or space rockets. The Cold War was also a battle of minds and propaganda, which is where the MKUltra program comes in. MKUltra started as a secret CIA project in the early 1950s and was officially sanctioned in 1953. But this wasn't your ordinary research program. Why? Because with MKUltra, the USA wanted to research mind control, interrogation, and behavior modification techniques. But wait, why did they want to do all this in the first place? 3 words: Jewish concentration camps. Here's the thing, the CIA had a lot of concerns about what the Soviet Union was doing to captive American spies and soldiers. Their number one theory? Brainwashing. The CIA was convinced that the Soviets, Chinese, and North Koreans were making significant advances in mind control techniques because they wanted to use it as a weapon in the war, and the USA didn't want to fall behind. If there's anything America doesn't like, it's being second best. What if the Soviets had discovered the ultimate weapon, not a nuclear bomb, but the power to control minds? Now, according to American author Stephen Kinzer, the idea of psychological warfare didn't just come out of nowhere. According to him, MKUltra was heavily influenced by the horrific experiments that were conducted in Nazi concentration camps. So these camps, especially Auschwitz and Dachau, witnessed the earliest use of the naturally occurring psychedelic substance mescaline as a way to control and subdue human minds. So what did the CIA do? They recruited Nazi operatives who had plenty of experience with using substances like these to torture people. But of course, all of this was kept under wraps. Nazis were brought to Fort Detrick in Maryland, which was the center of the project. Their job? To train the CIA on the potential applications of sarin gas, a deadly nerve agent that can leave the human mind absolutely wrecked. All in all, the US intelligence wanted to replicate the atrocities of World War II, but this time for their own motives. While CIA Director Alan Dulles greenlit the project, the mastermind behind it all was an American chemist named Sidney Gottlieb. While the official narrative behind MKUltra was that it was a response to potential threats, the reality, of course, was much darker. It was a quest for dominance, and the CIA was going to stop at nothing to achieve it, even if that meant bending ethical guidelines, or, resorting to a total violation of human rights. But I'll talk more about that later. Coming back to Gottlieb, he understood that to seize control of people's minds, he had to do 2 things. First, he had to completely erase the existing mind. Think of it as wiping a chalkboard clean, so that you can start writing on it from scratch. That's what he wanted to do with the human mind, turn it into a blank slate that the CIA could then use in any way they wanted, inserting any and all information that would turn this blank mind into a weapon for war. Chills, right? But for a project so horrific, where did Gottlieb and the CIA find their subjects? Now, this is where the horror really begins. Most of the people who were put through the terrible experiments of the MKUltra program were unsuspecting prisoners in American jails who wouldn't even get the chance to consent to the experiments. Most of these were American and Canadian citizens who had no idea that they were part of this huge project where their minds were being altered. Some experiments specifically targeted mental patients to capitalize on their vulnerable minds. Drug addicts were recruited for the same reason, with the promise of more drugs in exchange for their participation. But that's not where it stops. The CIA would also exploit escorts and college students, dosing them with all kinds of substances in exchange for money. But the worst is yet to come. Some researchers even targeted people with terminal illnesses like cancer, simply because they thought it was okay to experiment on individuals like these, since they didn't have much time to live anyway. Yeah, how messed up is that? Going back to prisoners though, these were some of the most widely used sites for the MKUltra experiments. Prisons offered a captive and controllable population. Inmates, often desperate for reduced sentences, extra privileges, or even just a break from the monotony of prison life, were sometimes easily coerced into participation. They provided an extra layer of protection for the program's secrecy, since whatever went on in these prisons stayed there. Inmates were often promised special privileges in exchange for their participation. These could include shorter sentences, cash, or drugs. Benefits like these, especially in the restrictive environment of a prison, made many inmates willing participants, even when they had no idea what kind of torture they were going to be put through. And once they had agreed, they couldn't back out. Not to mention that prison regulations back in the 50s and 60s were practically non-existent. So this lack of scrutiny made it easy for Gottlieb to conduct his horrific experiments without any kind of interference. One of the most infamous examples is Dr. Harris Isbell's experiments at the Addiction Research Center in Lexington, Kentucky. Officially a facility for treating drug addicts under Isbell, it also became a hub for MKUltra experiments. Addicted patients were kept on their drug of choice and then administered mind-altering substances. In some cases, prisoners would be kept under the influence for over 2 months without any breaks, allowing the researchers to test the limits of the human mind. One such case was of the notorious mobster James Whitey Bulger, who claimed that he had been injected with all kinds of drugs while he was incarcerated as part of a mind control program. He said that these drugs would give him hallucinations and emotional trauma that lasted years on end. According to Whitley, he was lured into the experiment and was told that the researchers were trying to find a cure for schizophrenia, a condition that he suffered from. For more than a year, Bulger was administered LSD daily, a powerful hallucinogenic drug. Only later would he realize that the experiment had nothing to do with schizophrenia. Instead, he was part of a sinister experiment, assessing the long-term impacts of LSD on the human psyche. Could a person be driven to the brink of madness, or perhaps beyond, with continuous doses of the drug? That's what Gottlieb wanted to find out. Getting deeper into these experiments and what they were like, the story of how LSD hit mainstream America has a bizarre twist. It traces back to the CIA. Yep, you heard that right. Sidney Gottlieb was borderline obsessed with LSD. Why? Because he thought that it was the key to mastering mind control. In a wild move during the 1950s, the CIA shelled out a whopping $240,000 to snatch up the world's entire stash of LSD. They didn't throw a massive party though. Instead, they started discreetly distributing it, sending it to hospitals, clinics, and even prisons. They masked these handouts with fake foundations, all with the goal of testing and seeing if LSD could really be the mind-controlling tool they hoped for. Gottlieb didn't even spare the CIA's own employees in his conquest of mind control. Agents and other staff were sometimes dosed with LSD without their knowledge, leading to a range of reactions. Some found the experience enlightening, while others had terrifying experiences or long-term psychological effects. Ultimately, LSD proved to be too unpredictable for what the CIA wanted to achieve, which is why the use of the drug was deprioritized. But don't be fooled, because Gottlieb also had some other weapons in his arsenal. The CIA experimented with hypnosis with the aim of turning war prisoners into couriers who could carry secret information without being aware of it, to be revealed later under post-hypnotic suggestion. Other goals included enhancing memory and extracting information from resistant subjects. Electric shocks were also used in some experiments, both as a form of torture and as a method to wipe or manipulate memory. But that's not where it stops. The subjects were also kept in isolation, deprived of sleep and even meals to see how their minds would respond. And in some cases, they were even subjected to assault and radiological experiments that would permanently scar them. By the late 1960s, it was becoming clear that most of the MKUltra experiments, especially those involving LSD, weren't yielding the results the CIA had hoped for. The agency began to wind down the program, and MKUltra was officially shut down in 1973. Now, the Watergate scandal, which broke in 1972, led to increased scrutiny of US governmental operations, especially covert ones like, you guessed it, MKUltra. With everyone paying close attention to what the government was doing, a journalist named Seymour Hersh wrote about some secret and possibly illegal stuff the CIA was up to, hinting at all the messed up things happening with the MKUltra project. This article got people curious, and soon special groups in the Senate started to dig deeper into what the CIA was really doing with MKUltra. In the middle of all of this, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered all MKUltra files to be destroyed in 1973. This move was intended to ensure that the illegal activities carried out under the program would remain forever hidden. And he succeeded in his plan. Well, almost. In 1975, Congress, particularly the Church Committee in the Senate and the Pike Committee in the House, began investigating the abuses of the CIA and other intelligence agencies. It was during these investigations that the limited remaining records of MKUltra were discovered, leading to public awareness of the program. But to this day, the world's full understanding of the MKUltra experiments and the reality is incomplete. But considering all that we have discovered with less than half of the original documentation, I can't even imagine the true horrors of it all. Now, with all this missing documentation, people have obviously been extremely curious, to the point of coming up with their own conspiracy theories about the whole thing. Some believe the main purpose of MKUltra was to create Manchurian candidates, or mind-controlled assassins. This theory posits that subjects were programmed to carry out political assassinations and could be triggered to act without remembering their actions afterward. But that's not where it ends. Some people think that MKUltra never really ended, but the CIA just changed its direction. There's a conspiracy theory that MKUltra is still ongoing and targets celebrities to subliminally control young minds through their influence. A lot of people think that the principles learned in MKUltra are being supplied broadly to the public through things like television programming, advertising, and even mobile phone technology to subtly influence mass behavior. But that's barely scratching the surface. Some conspiracy theorists argue that while MKUltra officially ended, it merely morphed into different programs with different names, ensuring that the mind control research would continue in secret. These people also think that the US government used alien technology to advance their mind control techniques. They claim that the sudden interest in mind control in the 50s and 60s was because of newfound extraterrestrial tech. Sounds crazy when you think about it, right? But could it be true? All in all, the MKUltra experiments are a dark chapter in world history, one that might never truly be unveiled. What if the experiments never truly ended? Makes you wonder, doesn't it? What was your biggest takeaway from this? Let us know in the comments. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.